Thank you very much. We'll switch here to... And we will welcome now Dr. Rob Merritt from Bluefield College to give a presentation.
Good morning. So I want to talk about the writing workshops that are being held at the birthplace. We talked about the birthplace last night, and some things have been going on there, and they're still going to continue going on there. I'm actually working on a grant to pick the writers who are going to be coming to this workshop next year. So I want to say that I live down in Bluefield, but I've taught in China. I've been to Nanjing, not to Nanjing University, but it's called Yangtze Second Normal University, and I taught poetry, American poetry and creative writing there. And I did go to Nanjing University and see the little house where Pearl Buck lived when she was teaching there. And I've done these writing workshops, a writing workshop at the Hillsborough birthplace, and it was about connections between Chinese and Appalachian poets. And so that connection between Appalachia and China is just everywhere. And I've heard, different things about even the land is very similar, and coal. And somebody told me copperheads are only found in China and Appalachia. As has been mentioned several times, one of Pearl's goals for the birthplace is to her mother's house is that may it prove for others too a gateway to new thoughts and dreams and ways of life. So I feel like one gateway is this connection with China. And so I thought I might try to emphasize how China might be connected to the place in this ideogram for poetry. So, can anybody read that? So, that's a mouth. You can see that, can't you? And it's a speaking. And on top of that, or lines, and so that means like to say, so a mouth saying some kind of lines. And on the top right hand, it means place. And then originally, that was like a piece of land with a tree growing out of it. And the bottom one is a little more complicated, but it has to do with measure. Actually, that was supposed to be the measure of the distance between your pulse and your wrist. But it also meant the measure of law. So a place where like laws were made, which was temples. And so if you put all that together, it seems like the meaning of the word for poetry in China is like temple speaking or measured language in a holy place. So I'd like to think about Pearl's place being like that. And so I talked about this at a workshop I gave at the birthplace, but I didn't do that homework. And so I just put that up there, and people said, what does that mean? And I wasn't prepared. I didn't have the answer. But this answer came from Jerry Bell, who is a writer who works with veterans, actually, and she sent this email that talked about the meaning of that. And so I think that's a great example of this community that's going on through these workshops, that this person who attended did this research about explaining that ideogram and sent it to all the members who came to the workshop that day. And so it's a community. And so I don't know whether people would think there's any connection between Appalachian poetry and Chinese poetry, but how about this? He liked flowers. This is called Portrait of the Artist with Lipo. He liked flowers and water most. Everyone knows that the true story of how we would write his verses and float them by paper downstream and just watch them drift away. Death never entered his poems, but rode with his hair down, far down on the lake, laughing and looking up at the sky. Over 1,000 years later, I write out my lines in my notebook. The peach blossoms follow the moving water, and watch the October darkness gather against the hills. All night long, the river of heaven will move westward while no one notices. The distance between the dead and the living is more than a heartbeat and a breath. So that's by Charles Wright, who I'm going to call him Appalachian, even though he lives in Charlottesville, Virginia right now. He's been the poet laureate, but he's written a bunch of stuff about Chinese poets in his, he even has a volume of poems called Appalachia. And maybe, there's many, many examples. But George Scarborough is a Tennessee writer, and he has a whole book that's called Under the Lemon Tree, and it's all about Hans Schahn, the poet named Cold Mountain. Hans Schahn was a taker of roads, speaking doubtless in his unrest, clever and excellent words pronouncing the way. All men tread the same ground, experiencing a sunrise and sunset. The same astonishment of first love, grievous as the screech of grief. I've invested a fabled poet with immediate presence, furnished a good man a good life. And so we could mention many other, like Eddie Pendarvis has a book about Appalachian Chinese poetry that's called Like Mountains in China. Dan Strike is a poet down in Bristol, Virginia, and he's written many poems about Wang Wei and different Chinese poets. Danny Marion is a Tennessee poet. He has but the title of one book is called The Chinese Poet Awakens. And Kirk Judd has been tuned into that, and I've written some poems about that. And so I've been trying to push that a little bit, and so I got this email from a professor who worked with Eddie Pendarvis at Marshall, but he's an IT person. But so this was an email that had me and several Chinese professors involved in it, which says, "Thanks so much for connecting us to the professors who are so much better at answering questions from Dr. Merritt. It's very interesting to learn the connections between contemporary Appalachian poets and ancient Chinese poets. Professor Zhang, Professor Zhu, Dr. Edwina Pendarvis is a poet herself. She's also a scholar of Appalachian studies. It's really worth exploring the connection between contemporary Appalachian poets and Tang Dynasty poets. If there are reincarnations in the world, I suspect the Tang Dynasty poets are now living in places like West Virginia and Kentucky." I just love that an IT person is going to talk about reincarnation of these poets. So, have a great spring festival. Okay, so that had to do with somewhat how my feelings about those workshops there. So I'd like to say a little bit about the different presenters who have been to these workshops at the birthplace. And they are held in the Seidenstricker cabin, which is where Pearl's father was born, and as Kirk said last night, has been moved beside her family's house. And my mother's sister, who grew up in Clifton Forge, Virginia, that's pretty near the West Virginia line, married a Seidenstricker. So I like to think I'm related. And she told me, she remembers the family talking about Absalom's Bible and how he was always talking about that. So I felt that's another personal connection. So these are the different presenters, and so I wanted to talk to all of them, and I did. And I already had named this talk that was going to be not having to be alone is happiness, and something about how connecting to each other and people far away helps to deal with isolation. And it's funny how that term turned up in several comments that the different presenters told me about. So Meredith Sue Willis was in 2014. And she was born in Harrison County, and she's written about 20 books of fiction and nonfiction, lives in New York City. So these are her words. My presentation at the birthplace in 2014 was called Pearl Buck as Social Activist. I emphasized her deep identification with the oppressed and her work with poor Chinese, and then when she was back in the States with disabled children, mixed race children, with civil rights, a whole slew of other things. I'd first heard of her as a famous nice lady. So I was tickled pink when she turned out to have been a regular firebrand, albeit a generally well-dressed and ladylike one. I've been deeply inspired by people, even women, who appear in history as ladies and turn out to be change agents. We always, every time you see a picture of Pearl, she's very well-dressed. Even Pearl S. Buck's worst potboiler novels had a social conscience, and her best work, especially her memoirs of her mother and father, as well as the currently underrated Good Earth, are powerful works in structure, impact, and language. So in 2015, 3 people presented, Sherelle Wiggle, myself, and Sarah Elkins. And so Sherelle says, and she wrote, her workshop was about a gateway between your story and yourself. I was pleased at the attendance. Local people and people from Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, and Virginia. So with people who've not been there and maybe who are going to go tomorrow, it's not just right there off the interstate or anything. You have to really be working to get there. And so that people could be from so much faraway locations, I mean, that's pretty amazing. And they didn't really know each other. And there was something new to creative writing. So I was quite delighted, Sherelle says, with the sense of a safe community that immediately encompassed the workshop and the participants. I believe the local location played a large part in accomplishing that sense of security. So several people talk about just the power of that location and how it makes you feel. I tried to focus the workshop on the desire of everyone to tell their story so that others who might read or hear their story could identify and feel less alone. So yeah, she said that, and I had my title, but we didn't, that was just, it all came together. What satisfied me the most was as a result of the workshop, many of the participants formed their own email writing group called the Pearl Buckboard Writers. So somehow, that's another example of this community still going on, like this group of people who had never met before are now emailing each other about writing a year later. The writers who attended my workshop, let's see. Personally, Pearl Buck has been an inspirational writer in person to me. She reaches beyond her writing to encompass compassion and activism. She writes from a perspective both easily accessible and prompts deep thought. And the other presenter in 2015 was Sarah Elkins. She's a poet that lives in White Sulphur Springs. And she really focuses on the location, and her workshop was about place and human and the natural world interaction. The writers who attended my workshop wandered the yards around the house to find inspiration for their poems. Even the indoor spaces were more clearly connected to the outdoors. For the purpose of my workshop, it was far superior to be surrounded by rich hardwoods and stone masonry, doors that stood open all day and windows that looked out at the mountains. I think immediately of the difference between the earthiness of the birthplace and the sterility of a classroom, with fluorescent lights, white cinder block walls, and air conditioning is always too cold. The birthplace is a retreat center. I would like to see the birthplace more often used for writers for building a community of writers. And so Kat Pleska, she's been a president of the Western Union Writers, and she recently has published a memoir called Writing on Comets. Had the privilege of doing her workshop right during the flood this year. And it was about memoirs and memories. During the deluge that flooded so many, the workshop was well attended. I would have had more, but flooding prevented people from attending. And she couldn't even have it at the birthplace, right? They had to go to the public library in Marlinton. All right, for me personally, I credit Pearl Buck, this is Kat Pleska talking. I credit Pearl Buck for helping me believe that not only could I be a writer, but that someday I might be an author. I tell this story often because it's true. What happened and truly inspired me. I was in Marlinton as a young teen during Pioneer Days. I was watching a parade when it began to sprinkle. I was short enough to slip under the bleachers lining Main Street to continue watching the parade. Many legs dangled in front of me in the seat above, and one pair of legs had varicose veins, a navy satin skirt, and old lady shoes. Then I heard the mayor announce, "Ladies and gentlemen, please come welcome West Virginia's First Lady of Literature, Pearl Buck." And the varicose legs uncrossed and Pearl Buck stood up. I'd been standing directly underneath the Pulitzer Nobel-winning author. I went home and wrote without realizing the deep impact. No matter what, I continue and have Pearl Buck to thank for the gateway to the greatest passion of my life. So she stood under her. Also in 2016, poet Cheryl Denise gave a workshop, and this is what she says about the home place. The Pearl Buck birthplace is a beautiful place to hold a workshop. It's a simple log home with such history and such a beautiful green expanse of land within the mountains. Just the drive there makes one's problems seem so distant and unimportant in the vast scope of the earth. And having the workshop sitting around a wooden table in a circle makes you feel connected to everyone's creativity, including Pearl Buck's. Had a wonderful afternoon. I'm a richer person for having been there. And there's still going to be one more that hasn't occurred yet. And it's by Eric Fritzius, and it's going to be, this Saturday, the 17th, at the birthplace. So this is a pitch for you guys. Stay there. So he's a performer, director, teacher, audiobook narrator, and He's been very involved in West Virginia writers and has published a book of short stories. And he works in the prison in Beckley, and he does writing workshops. And so the workshop that he's talking about is called Mining for Gold, utilizing and expanding upon what I've done in Beckley about using memory and mining techniques to inform your writing. And so we're hoping this will be continuing in perpetuity. Again, I talked about the connections between the Chinese and Appalachian poets that I talked about. But here's one piece of advice that I mentioned in that workshop, and it's from an 11th century Chinese literary critic, Wei Tai. Poetry presents the thing in order to convey the feeling. It should be precise about the thing and reticent about the feeling. As soon as the mind responds and connects with the thing, the feeling shows in the words. That is how poetry enters deeply into us. If the poet presents directly the feelings which overwhelm him, it keeps nothing back to linger. As an aftertaste, he stirs us superficially. So maybe that's something anybody who wants to think about being a poet might consider. Don't do that romantic thing. Okay. So I wrote a poem I'd like to share with you that has to do with Pearl Buck, my experience there. And it's called Book Report. I read The Exile by Pearl Buck, about her mother, Carrie, about the exile she felt returning home to the mountains of Hillsborough, West Virginia, every 10 years, an outsider there, as in China, changed by China. That book out of print, although I see it's here. But it's not on Amazon. I found it in the library of the small Baptist college where I teach. Why was it there anyway? I guess because Pearl was a missionary or something like that. But the Baptist librarians in 1940 know that after following her husband Absalom through the fetid ghettos of China and watching 3 children die in her arms, that Carrie hated St. Paul. And she actually says that in the Exile book. But in the card pocket of that 1936 book, there's the person's name who checked that book out. And so I want to look her up in the alumni thing. Kay Lawrence, April 1st, 74. And so I'm going to add to this, the same year that Dave Corcoran went to Boston and brought the manuscripts back to West Virginia Wesleyan. The same year that I waited to leave college scared of Vietnam, venerating Kerouac in my back porch, a Baptist girl in the Blue Ridge Mountains touched a woman's bittersweet novel about far away on April Fool's Day. Only the faintest pencil underlinings. Kay knew not to mark library books. Beauty was a sort of oxygen that gave her life energy. I mean, I just love that quote in that book, like beauty is oxygen, about Pearl talking about her mother. At a college where men in flat tops wore flat tops in 74, Kay launched her blossoming. Hers was a sensuous nature, and Carrie had felt God's frown. And Kay, she underlined, music is not technique and melody, but the meaning of life itself, infinitely sorrowful and unbearably beautiful. What, did Kay become a piano teacher, or a weaver of tapestries, or marry a missionary? Did she even finish the book? The underlining stop on page 67. Carrie went to her heaven, and her zealous husband went to his. One night in Xinjiang, men angry at foreigners and drought came to Carrie's house to kill her. Absalom was out, but she was ready. Lights on, doors open, a party with her children. She offered tea and cakes to the dark men. She had faith, but she also had beauty and hospitality and innocence of children. Fear is what we must dance with. The men drank tea and ate, for they were hungry, and departed, axes dragging in the dust. So I opened the dusty leaves of the book into the sun after 40 years, and I feel Kay and Carrie and Pearl singing the wisdom of exile. Who knows? God may like laughter and dancing and beauty, and that's a big statement for like a missionary. Negotiating a sensual dance with fear in the restorative air of discreet mountains. And so I might just finish by... There's so many of these Chinese poems are about leaving, going somewhere. Since Nanjing is where Pearl was, I found this poem by Li Bai about parting at a wine shop in Nanjing. A wind bringing willow cotton sweetens the shop, and a girl from Wu pouring wine urges me to share it with my comrades of the city who are here to see me off. And as each of them drains his cup, I say to him in parting, "Oh, go and ask the river running to the east if it can travel farther than our friends love." And by the way, I've talked to we have an exchange program with China at my college, and I've talked to some students about Chinese poetry, and they go, there is no translation into English that makes any sense of a Chinese poem. And so any of our understanding of Chinese poetry is like 50 degrees removed. But anyway, did you know Pearl Buck wrote poetry? I think that book might be out of print too. But anyway, she wrote this poem called Alone. I, on my own grave sleeping, yet shall I hear you, yet see, in whatever place, while my soul presses on to new and lonely birth, you I shall hear, shall see, though you walk the earth. I can almost feel her, like looking down in Hillsborough like that. So, I would just say that the Mid-Autumn Festival is coming in 2 or 3 days, and I'm going to say Happy Moon Festival to you. Thank you.
All right, and we'll open up the floor to some questions. As I said, I'll repeat the questions back so that we can hear those. But if anyone has any questions.
I have a statement,
Okay.
a compliment to young Annie,
Yeah.
that you have done for your grandparents, your great-grandparents, what Pearl did for hers. And I also have a suggestion for another paper. Why don't you perhaps also, well, both mother and grandparents and the genealogy and from exile and fighting angel, you could trace both male and female and many, many comparisons.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent.
My pleasure. Thank you for the paper.
Thanks for recommending that.
Yes.
I just want to say too, they were all three so awesome. I just am so glad that I'm here.
Excellent. Excellent. Other questions at all? Yes.
Quick question for Annie.
Mhm.
Have your mother or grandmother read the book? Do you know what their thoughts are about the book? If they see a
So
person-
the question being, have your grandmother and mother read the book?
My mom has read the book. I don't know if my grandmother has, but my grandmother was the main source for the paper. So she's really, why Julia's story got told. So, because she wasn't around to tell me the story herself. But mom read the book, and she loved it. She read it in 8th grade, actually. So we have a long history with it.
Other questions? Yes.
Question regarding land and value of land, particularly in terms of the second presenter, kind of relating to the first and Annie's statement that there's only the grandmother and the younger brother who want to keep the land. The rest of the family wants to sell the land, right, which will be probably within the next decade. But then we have this idea of land as the tying piece and the sort of the centerpiece that grounds us. So I'd like the presenters to speak to that, like, right, how do you move forward with land that's potentially worth a lot of money and be able to do things in the modern world, but, right, the house is in disrepair. Do you hold the land forever until somebody actually is inspired to go work the land, or do you sell the land and move on and do something different?
So the question about the maybe the value of the land in a modern society and how do you move forward with that. And I'll let either of you, if you'd like to come up to the podium and speak to that, whoever wishes to.
Well,
Go ahead, Al.
First of all, when a land gets down to me, when it's passed down to me, I would want to keep it in my family forever because, I didn't live near the land, but I remember going up there and, falling and skinning my knee on the gravel pavement and crying all the way home but it's just it was painful, but it's a good memory, I used to go up there and I would play in those hills, and I would hate to see it not belong to my family anymore. I'd hate to see it in the name of another family. So that's what I would say. And my mamaw, she's not going to sell it, but I fear that when it gets when she's gone, that it's going to not be up to me. It's going to be up to other people whether it stays. But I pray that it would stay in my family forever. That would be my wish.
Well, I think that's a good question on where but I think maybe that's part of what I was trying to get at with my closing paragraph or so, that, and maybe this is reading too much into things, but the mobility in our modern culture is part of an instability, that we're not as connected to land. And there's lots of reasons for that, like the move from agrarian society to manufacturing to technology and stuff. And we have the wealth and the capacity to move all over the place and everything, but I sense a kind of restlessness maybe in our persona and soul because of that too. So maybe we've already lost that. Whereas that generation understood losing that and what that means for them because they have it, we don't have it anymore. So it's just a thought. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It touches on a lot of, you're touching on a lot of things there. And of course, I'm speaking as somebody of a certain age, but I notice even with my children who are going to be this year yet 26 and 21, not near the connection to place that there is for my wife and I, as we think of where we came from in Arkansas, Texas, place. And even, I mean, one of the things we love to do, my wife and I, is to look at cemeteries. Yeah. My kids are like, that's crazy, you know. So I don't know, I think there's just a lot of generational things there, and I don't know how that'll all play out before the world ends or whatever the future comes or whatever, but those are interesting questions that I think these authors understood that value and saw it leaving in some kind of way. And so they're tapping into something, that's my thought.
Yeah.
West Virginia has a wonderful law called Farmland Preservation Act, which allows counties to take the property transfer tax that's levied every time a piece of property is sold and put it into a fund to buy the development rights on farmland so that this young lady's family could sell the development rights, providing income for future generations and still the property, but with the restriction that it can never be developed. And that, I know in Pocahontas County and Monroe County, where I live, it's a really good program, and it's getting more popular all the time. It's a way to continue beyond the grave, the family ownership of farms.
Development, yes.
But it requires the joint agreement of everybody in the family, and that can present a problem,
Yeah.
which I think you were suggesting.
Mm-hmm.
I inherited a farm with my sister, and she died. I now own it with her two daughters, who have, the only thing they see are the dollar signs.
Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of.
Okay.
I wanted
Yeah,
to
sorry, I
ask
would-
the question of all of us in here to help answer this question. How many of us have perhaps personally in our own family lives experienced this problem of losing farms, losing property,
Yep, so
and having people leave the farm?
asking, yes, how many here have experienced that sense of losing land, or, so we're good. I think I saw, were you, yes.
Yeah, this is just a general comment about the good earth. I didn't grow up in West Virginia, but I read it in high school, and I was asking my West Virginia college kids how many of them had read The Good Earth, and I found that none of them had. And I wonder if we would consider a state law it's required reading as a senior in high school.
We certainly look at that in terms of this collaborative with the Birthplace Foundation, West Virginia Wesleyan, WVU, is how do we bring, let's say, appreciation for that particular work back into as a sense of acknowledgement of Pearl, but also of the significance of that work in this state. So yes, that's certainly your comment is appreciated.
I'd suggest ninth grade reading so that the rest of their high school and college, they have others to read. of pearls.
That's true.
Get them early.
Although, is
Yes.
it too sophisticated for a ninth grader?
No, it's not really. Ninth and tenth of today's people. In Pearl's day, yes, remember the missionaries were horrified that it was as graphic.
Actually, I have a,
Yeah, I was wondering if anyone in this room knows of any Pearl Buck works where she directly compares Appalachia with China?
so the question is, if anyone here is aware of any works where Pearl Buck directly correlates or compares Appalachia to China, and I'm not sure of the answer to that. Others may have that knowledge here.
I think probably the closest you come to My Separate Worlds.
My Separate Worlds, okay.
It's not
Separate or
Appalachia
several?
Specific, but
You say several worlds or separate?
Several.
Okay.
I recall a book where she compares like Japan and China and some of the different Asian cultures, and I don't remember it. Is that the book where she kind of does some cultural comparisons? Not
It's,
just-
yeah. That's what I'm seeing from Kirk, is nodding.
Yeah, what is the name of that?
Is that the hidden flower?
The hidden, is it?
My Several Worlds.
My Several Worlds is the. Yes.
I just wanted to comment that there's a thing going around on Facebook saying you own X number of acres of land. It's like promoting the national parks.
Oh, okay.
So that's another way that we might be headed, is that we need to own the land jointly as people on the planet, that we can all experience it that way instead of our individual families hanging on to it.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, isn't it sometimes suggested that the new industry for West Virginia should be tourism or something? And so we have, people coming to the land, and that whole thing about national parks, what is that? We're celebrating that thing, like people are going to national parks like crazy. So,
100th anniversary.
Comments on the
Yeah.
collective ownership of land and preservation of land, yes. Do we have another? Yes.
I think too that it kind of we're reverting back to perhaps the Indian way, that no one owns the land personally, they own it as a group
Mhm.
and enjoy it.
No comment saying from the Native American perspective of that land is not owned. But-
Native
But-
American.
No, that's all right. Are there other questions or comments? Yes.
Could I ask Rob the source of the lady with the varicose veins, please, and the old lady shoes? Her story.
Sure.
That's a cat later.
Kat Pleska,
Cat.
from Catherine, I guess, Pleska, and she lives in Charleston, I think.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Yes.
Just a comment, I really enjoy the connections made to the land in these presentations. I am from Hillsborough, grew up there. I did know Pearl Buck. I did know Louise McNeil Pease, who lived and grew up just a few miles away. And if you've read her work as well, you know that she also was closely tied to the land. The theme there, as one who has grown up in that environment, is we were drilled in the importance of the land and holding on to what we had. And when I was growing up, it did not matter what kind of a hardscrabble farm you were on, you had a sense of pride as to what you owned and what you were able to produce from that. And the children I went to school with had that sense of pride. I am so disturbed now by what has happened in West Virginia with the displacement in the southern counties and what has happened with our children who no longer feel that sense of pride in land, that sense of pride in place that these women had, and it's very evident in their writings. New research is out. Our young people are struggling, and they're struggling mightily in soul and in heart. The new research is saying, send them back to the land. Send them back to a place of peace. The new research is saying, take a walk in a park. Communicate,
Yes.
mindfulness, that's where our mindfulness movement is coming from. I
Okay,
appreciate the
sure.
connections these people have
I think with that, that's probably a good stopping place for us now, so we can all adjourn for a short break, and the next session will be coming back together at 10:40, so we have about, I think, 15 minutes or so. Thank you all very much for your participation.